It has been 6 years since I heard my mother's voice and even longer since I believed it ever said anything true. My name is Nora Wyatt and I was, for a very long time, the girl who kept her family together by holding her breath, counting peace as the seconds in which nobody shouted. I learned early that love in our house came with costs and keeping score, that apologies vanished like morning mist and forgiveness was always something you had to owe. When I finally went no contact, it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like being lowered into a quiet so complete, I didn't remember ever hearing my own footsteps before. I left from the faded porch at midnight, one suitcase, a purse, and all my softest clothes pressed tight so nothing breakable rattled. No note, no goodbye. Just the last turning of the key in the lock I'd once begged to have my name on. I don't have to explain why, do I? If you're still listening this far, you already know. Some families draw blood like interest. Some mothers make you choose between your own happiness and their approval, and then hate you both ways. Fathers who punish with silence and withdrawal more than anyone else could with fists. Baby brothers who learn the script so young you wish you could teach them a different alphabet. I was the middle child, the keeper, the interpreter, the buffer, the peace negotiator. When I stopped answering at 23, it was because every phone call was a fresh cut. Every group text an unspoken demand, and every holiday a stage for grievances performed for their favorite audience. Themselves. I built a life in those 6 years out of things that never demanded an apology and never required my blood to keep growing. I joined a library, started walking at dawn, made friends in the kind of slow, careful way people make friends after years of not trusting a word out of anyone's mouth. I met Lizzie in a coffee shop, and in her laugh I heard home for the first time, real and unbowed. We moved in together the next September. A little apartment with uneven floors and a leaky tap. More laughter than shouting, food that tasted like kindness, not always salt. Work was small, steady. I became the manager of a local bookstore, spent my days alphabetizing other people's stories, imagining lives for characters who were never forced to play peacemaker. Every so often the world would remind me of what I had lost. Christmas cards arriving with no return address, old photos showing up in group chats until I changed my number again. That was the price. 6 years of silence, broken only by the thudding certainty that I had finally traded misery for peace. Then on a Thursday night everything changed. It was late winter, city snow melting into black lines along the curb. Lizzie had gone to bed with the heat on high after a day spent sorting tax documents and murmuring about starting a new life somewhere warm. I sat on the couch with a book half-read and a cup of herbal tea growing cold, wrapped in the worn flannel she'd given me months ago for good dreams. The first call came at 1:03 a.m. Unknown number but the area code from back home. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. I turned the phone over, set it on Do Not Disturb, tried to force my eyes back to the page. With each vibration my heart thudded sharper, my mind counting 3, 4, 5, 10, 30. The voicemail box filled, then the text notification stacked in a rising, relentless column. Mom, please answer. Brady, call home fast. Mom, it's urgent. Nora, please. Dad, pick up. We need you. The last was at 1:49 a.m. By then I had counted 89 missed calls, a number so grotesque it was almost comic. I stood in the hall, watching the phone light up again and again. Fragments of an old nightmare I thought I'd already survived. What could merit this? What crisis, what disaster, what new play in the endless family drama? I watched my reflection in the hall mirror. Not the little girl who cried herself to sleep, not the scapegoat or the peacekeeper. Just me, heart pounding, free as I had ever been, and more afraid than I'd ever admit. I could still hear my mother's voice, the old tricks. Lead with guilt, hint at tragedy. Always enough uncertainty to make you surrender curiosity for self-preservation. I let the phone ring to the end unanswered. I went to bed with dawn shivering through the curtains, the city alive with possibility just beyond the glass. I slept, troubled, restless, dreams of old grievances flickering at the edge of light. When I woke up, the phone was silent but full, voicemails stacked, some only a gasp and a sob, others a rising tide of threats and pleas. I made myself coffee, sat down, sipped slow, and scrolled through the debris of desperation sent in blue light across the miles. Whatever storm had come to call me back, I knew this time I would not answer until I was ready to face not only whatever they wanted, but who I'd become in all the silence they'd given me to grow. I stood in my kitchen staring at 89 missed calls, feeling the old ache at the base of my skull, the place where anxiety always pooled in my family home. There is a moment after years of holding silence, when you realize the world hasn't ended. The rent's still paid, the coffee still brews, the lungs still draw breath, even with a dozen messages screaming for your attention from hundreds of miles away. I told myself I owed them nothing, not after the years I'd spent absorbing every storm and being left to mop up my own tears. But the thing about family, even the poisonous kind, is that the old roots keep twitching, hoping you'll reach for their poison as if it's medicine. I spent all morning pacing, phone in my hand like a bad talisman. Each time I came close to listening to a voicemail, I remembered all the times my mother had used the word emergency for nothing more than her own loneliness, her own need for a witness or an audience. I was not going to slip again into that role just because desperation had changed its ringtone. Still, the pile of messages grew into a knot in my chest. I did what I've always done. Opened the bookstore early, stacked new arrivals, lost myself in the ritual of order. I let Lizzie hold me with her eyes when she came in, her gentle "You okay?" wrapping around the part of me that still wanted to say yes to someone. "Family?" she asked. I nodded. I haven't heard from them in 6 years. Last night 89 calls in under an hour. So now I'm the emergency. She didn't press, just put a hand on my shoulder, softer than my mother's grip ever was, anchoring me in the present. Customers came and went. The day grayed into early evening. I pretended the world was normal, but every time the front bell rang, I imagined a letter in my mailbox with my old last name, a telegram from the past carrying bad news. Still I waited. That night as the shop closed, I scrolled again, this time reading the texts. The first half dozen were pure guilt and fear. "Nora, you have to answer, it's urgent." "Sweetheart, please, we need you, something's happened." Then the mood changed. "Please" became threats, warmth turning sharp the way fire licks at wounds. "If you care at all, you'll call back. You left us, but you can't turn away now. Don't make us the villains when all we ever did was care." There were messages from my brother Brady, always the peacemaker. "Nora, please, it's bad this time, really bad, I promise it's not what you think." But wasn't it? Wasn't it always what I thought? Another crisis that required my sacrifice, another performance where I was supposed to hand over my piece for their applause? I didn't respond that night. Instead, I poured tea, sat beside Lizzie in the small patch of yellow lamplight that was ours, and let her read aloud from her current silly mystery novel, the safe predictability of fiction, a balm against the jagged uncertainty in my chest. Yet as the quiet deepened, the guilt gnawed. What if it was different this time? What if there was an ambulance, a fire, a death, an apology manufactured by grief? I lay awake most of the night, wrestling with the weight of old obligations. By 2 a.m., I'd constructed a dozen possible tragedies, from the mundane to the irreparable. I dreamed of my mother's desperate voice threading through my phone, my father's cold silence cracking into tears, my brother Brady caught in the middle as always, stretching thin to keep two sides from fracturing. In the half-light of dawn, I made myself a promise. I would listen to the first voicemail, just the first, enough to know whether the world as I once knew it had truly ended, or whether I could let the voice of my old life fade for good. When morning came, I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, thumb trembling, and pressed play. The voicemail began with static, then my mother's breathing, shallow and uneven, as if she had been running. "Nora, it's Mom. Please don't hang up. Your father is in the hospital, and Brady says you won't answer, but I know you're listening." I stared at the wall above the kitchen table, at the faint water stain shaped like a crooked map, and waited for the familiar hook, the accusation, the guilt, the sentence that would turn her emergency into my responsibility. Instead, there was a long silence. Then she whispered, "He asked for you." I almost stopped the message. For 6 years, my father had never asked for me. He had sent one birthday card through Brady when I turned 25, and inside it was a single line. "I hope you're finally learning to think beyond yourself." I had kept the card for 3 years before tearing it into pieces and throwing it away. Now my mother's voice continued. "The doctors say he may not make it through the day. You need to come home." Need. That word moved through me like an old draft under a locked door. I replayed the voicemail twice, listening for manipulation hidden beneath the panic, but all I heard was fear. Real fear, or a very convincing imitation of it. Lizzie came into the kitchen wearing my oversized sweatshirt, and found me still holding the phone. What happened? She asked. My father's in the hospital. She sat across from me without speaking. She had heard enough over the years to know that family emergencies were never only emergencies. Do you want to go? She asked. The question was simple, but it opened a room inside me I had spent 6 years keeping locked. I didn't know. That was the truth. I didn't know whether I wanted to see him, whether I wanted an apology, whether I wanted to stand beside his bed and feel nothing, or whether some ruined part of me still wanted him to open his eyes and say the one sentence he had withheld my entire life. I was wrong about you. I need facts, I said finally. Not feelings. Facts. Lizzie nodded. She had always understood that when I said facts I meant protection. I called the hospital's main number and asked to be connected to the intensive care unit. The nurse who answered confirmed that my father, Malcolm Wyatt, was a patient, but because I was not listed as an emergency contact, she could not discuss his condition. I gave her my name, my relationship, and my father's date of birth. There was a pause while she checked the system. He has been asking for you, she said carefully, but I'm not permitted to tell you anything more. Was he conscious? I asked. Another pause. Intermittently. I thanked her and hung up. For several minutes, neither Lizzie nor I spoke. The facts were few, but they were enough to make the decision for me. I would go home. Not because my mother ordered me to. Not because my father was dying. I would go because 6 years ago, I had left that house without ever saying what I needed to say, and I was tired of allowing their silence to write the ending of my life. We left that afternoon in Lizzie's old blue hatchback, carrying 2 overnight bags and the kind of tension that turns every mile marker into a question. My hometown was 4 hours away, past the river towns and abandoned factories, past the roadside diner where my father once left me alone for 3 hours because I had cried during a family dinner. I had not thought about that diner in years, but as we drove past the rusted sign, the memory returned with painful clarity. I was 16. My brother Brady had broken a window with a baseball, but my father had blamed me because I had provoked him. When I tried to defend myself, my mother told me not to make things worse. My father drove me to the diner, handed me $10, and said I could walk home when I was ready to be grateful. He left me there in the rain. Brady had been waiting at home with pizza. That was the night I first understood that in our family, truth mattered less than convenience. For years later, my younger sister Claire had taken money from my savings account to pay a gambling debt. When I confronted her, my mother called me selfish for making a family matter public. My father froze the account and told me I had 30 days to move out. Brady apologized privately, then asked me not to tell anyone he had seen Claire take the money. I became the villain because I refused to carry everyone else's secret. The final break came on my 23rd birthday. My father had promised to help pay for a graduate program I had worked toward for 2 years. At dinner, in front of my siblings, he announced that the money would instead go to Claire's new business. When I asked why, he said, "Because Claire understands loyalty." I remember setting down my fork. I remember my mother looking at her plate. I remember Brady rubbing his hands together beneath the table. And I remember saying very quietly, "Loyalty that requires me to disappear isn't loyalty." My father stood up. "Then disappear." So I did. For 6 years, I built a life without asking whether they approved of it. I changed my number, moved to another city, and stopped explaining myself to people who treated every explanation as evidence against me. Yet now I was driving back toward the house where that sentence had been spoken, with Lizzie beside me and 89 missed calls waiting in my phone. As we crossed the county line, a new message arrived from Brady. "Don't come to the hospital yet. There's something you need to know first." I read it once, then again. Before I could reply, another message appeared. "Dad didn't call you because he wants forgiveness." A third followed almost immediately. "He called because he found out what Mom and Claire did." I looked at Lizzie. "What did they do?" She reached for my hand across the console. My phone buzzed again. This time Brady sent a photograph. It showed a stack of legal documents on a hospital tray table, one page marked with my father's signature and a date from 6 years earlier, the exact week I had gone no contact. At the bottom of the page, beneath a heading that read Beneficiary Designation, was my name. And beneath my name in handwritten ink were 4 words that made my stomach turn cold. "Do not tell Nora." For a long silent minute, all I could do was stare at the photo glowing cruelly on my screen. A piece of paper I hadn't known existed. A decision my father had made in a hospital room without a word, protected for years by the same family silence that had always served only the powerful. Claire's name was written underneath mine, clear and bold, alongside my mother's rushed signature. It hit me then, during all those years my family acted like I didn't exist, my name was still inked where it counted most, but I was never meant to know. Brady's next message came quickly, his words unspooling in anxious bursts. Dad's been sick since December. He put you back as beneficiary the night after you left. He said legally it had to be you, that he owed you at least that much. Mom and Claire have been intercepting everything. They told everyone he cut you out. Even me. I didn't see the paperwork until now. The highway blurred past, my breath shallow. A cold skirmish of relief and rage warring in my chest. How many holidays, birthdays, whole seasons had I spent believing I'd been erased, when the truth was simply hidden, weaponized, as both loyalty and leverage? How many apologies had I rehearsed in my head for a silence that wasn't even mine to answer for? As we pulled off the interstate, the familiar shapes of my childhood town rose around us. The cracked concrete sign at the park, the faded green awning over the general store, the sleepy diner where, more than a decade ago, I learned that home is only kind if you're willing to forgive the people who never ask for it. Lizzie squeezed my hand as we turned onto my parents' street, the houses too close, the lawns too bare. The Wyatt home stood at the end, a strange mix of comfort and confusion, still the same blue shutters, still the wreath on the door, still an engine idling in the driveway. Brady pacing, fidgeting, a man thinned by disappointment but not yet hollowed by it. He wrapped me in a hug so quick I barely processed its comfort, then stepped back. Claire and Mom aren't here. Just us, he said, voice taut with exhaustion. Dad's in room 204 at County General. He's awake. For the second time in a day, I heard my own heartbeat crowding out the past. Lizzie offered to wait behind, her eyes asking, "Are you sure?" I nodded. I need to see him alone. The hospital was smaller than I remembered, the halls barely wide enough for two people with wide histories to pass each other by without brushing pain. At the front desk I gave my name and was ushered toward the ICU. Past doors that smelled of antiseptic and secrets. I paused outside room 204, listening to the gentle mechanical exhale of machines. Through the window I saw my father, not the fortress of a man who orchestrated every family script, but a small figure framed by a hospital gown and tubes, skin grayer than memory allowed. For a moment I felt outside my own body, watching some other daughter enter, some other script unfold. But it was me. Not the little girl desperate for approval, not the scapegoat, just a grown woman with a new life and a list of questions she never got to ask. My father looked up, surprise and something softer flickering in his eyes. He motioned for me to sit, his voice hoarse from illness or maybe just too many years of silence. "You came," he managed. "Brady said you needed facts." For once I didn't fill the quiet. "Why did you make me beneficiary again?" I asked, fighting the shake in my voice. He looked away, studying the rough weave of the blanket. "Because I was wrong. You didn't take. You never did. I knew you'd leave, but I didn't know how well you'd survive. Claire and your mother." He coughed, coughing up his pride. "They feared losing what they'd never earned. So they locked you out and kept that secret for themselves." I waited, aching with the effort of not forgiving, not yet. "Did you want me to come back?" His face crumpled just for a second, then smoothed. "I wanted you to live. I hoped you'd visit. I didn't want to be forgiven. I wanted to be remembered." Thunderclouds pressed against the small window, the world outside going gray, the silence resting like damp paper around all the things that could not be fixed. I sat for a while, watching my father's breathing slow, listening to machines carry the rhythm of a man who had always relied on others to pump the air of his own making. I asked the questions I didn't know 6 years ago. Are you afraid? Do you regret? Is there peace in a life lived for performance, not kindness? He tried to answer each, sometimes with words, sometimes with just the gentle pressure of his hand on mine. I always loved you, Nora. I just didn't know how to keep you if you left. I believed him in that fragile, almost useless way people believe after the final reckoning, where truth is no longer currency but closure. As I left the room, Brady pulled me aside, his voice tense from years of carrying burdens that weren't his. You won't believe what Mom and Claire did while you were gone, he said. Dad's lawyer is on his way. They've cleaned out his accounts. Mom tried to change the documents, but she forged your signature. If you hadn't answered, they would have gotten everything. Rage flashed through me, hot, brief, and then gone. We fix what we can, I said. And what we can't, we survive. When I stepped outside into the waning light, my phone buzzed with a new message from Claire. I heard you're home. Just remember, you betrayed us first. Through it all the guilt and secrets and stories I'd never been allowed to tell, that was what they believed. But I was done measuring my life by what wicked people chose to remember. The next day we would meet the lawyer. But tonight I sat under the old maples with Brady and Lizzie, letting the air fill with quieter, newer memories. A taste of belonging that, after everything, no one could sign away. Morning came with rain drumming on the window and the low rumble of distant voices. I barely slept, but when I woke there was clarity, as if returning to the place of so many wounds had burned away the haze of old confusion. The lawyer arrived just after breakfast, a slight man in a gray suit who spoke carefully, as if every word might be ammunition. We met around my father's bed. Me, Brady, and the solicitor, Dad propped on pillows, his face determined and frail. Your father's most recent legal documents are back in order, the lawyer explained, shuffling papers. He reinstated you as sole beneficiary 6 years ago. There was a recent attempt to alter those forms with forgeries. We'll proceed with prosecution if you wish, but Mr. Wyatt's intent is clear. I glanced at my father, searching for the old malice, the iron will that shaped my childhood, but found only the tired relief of someone whose final acts were not about control, but setting burdens down. I nodded. We won't press charges, I said. But the money goes to his care. To Brady and to the people who showed up. Dad squeezed my hand, small, hard, final. Later that day, Claire and my mother burst into the hospital, their fury barely disguised as worry. My mother launched into her performance. Nora, how could you take advantage at a time like this? But the old scripts were transparent now. I saw them as stagecraft, not truth. I let her finish, then answered quietly. For 6 years I asked for peace. You gave me absence. I'm not giving you one more thing. Claire glared, indignant, as if the world's rules had been rewritten overnight. Dad wanted the family together. You made it impossible. But the lawyer was ready. He handed over documents, her attempt at fraud, the accounts quietly emptied, the evidence of every act they'd sworn I'd invented. My mother's jaw set, but the words had no magic left. If you stay, I told them, stay for him, not to fight for money that was never really yours. They left, rattling doors behind them, and the heavy quiet that followed was almost a blessing. For 3 days Brady and I stayed by our father's side. We shared memories, truths, even jokes, bitter, honest, real because there was no one left to stage manage our grief. Dad faded peacefully, asking only that we live out loud, not in apology or silence. He died with my hand in his, Lizzie just outside the room, Brady weeping openly for the childhood he'd spent negotiating as I had, for scraps of kindness. The funeral was small, just the 3 of us, the lawyer and a few neighbors. No grand eulogies, no rewritten histories. We buried our father in the rain, mud clinging to our shoes, the past finally truly behind us. The estate settled quietly. My mother and Claire left the town, lawyers dealing with the details. They never called again, and I never called them. Brady stayed, settling into a life real for the first time, not lived in sacrifice. Lizzie and I drove home, her hand held tight in mine. And at a rest stop I breathed the scent of wet asphalt and felt something inside me release. I had not won exactly. I had simply reached the end of a war fought for so long I'd forgotten where the battlefield ended and my own choices began. My phone, silent for weeks, buzzed with messages from old friends. Some offered condolences, some asked if I was back in the family. I wrote all of them the same truth. I built a family out of the people who chose me, not the people who claimed me and spent me down to the bone. Months passed. The bookstore grew. Brady sent photos of his new apartment, his battered furniture shining like a badge of freedom. On the anniversary of my father's death, I took Lizzie out for dinner and toasted, quietly, to the peace I might never have found if not for cutting every tie they used to strangle me. Sometimes people say forgiveness is freedom. For me, it was never that. Freedom grew each time I said no and meant it each time I cut the old ropes someone else had tied. Freedom is waking up 1 year later and realizing your heart is not owed your story, not just the echo of someone else's storm. I went no contact for 6 years, and yes, they called 89 times in 1 hour, but I owed them not a minute more. My life began again in the answering of their silence with my own. If you're reading this and know the cost of peace, I hope you choose it anyway, even if the price is every call that comes in the middle of the night. In the end, the loudest thing I ever did was keep quiet, and that was finally enough.